A very warm welcome, everyone, to the first day of the Dutch Design Week. My name is Max de Ploeg. I will be moderating this session, and I'm honored that I've been invited. For those who don't know me, I'm in my daily life a social activist surrounding the themes of decolonization, environmental justice, inequality, racism, you name it. They interject, and that's why I also feel honored today to be invited, because we have a very special guest coming all the way from Australia, Julia Watson, who I will introduce a bit more elaborate later. So the event title is Lo-TEK Infrastructures of an Ancestral Design. I already like the title because it connects the past, our present, and the future, which I think is important to move forward with the challenges we have today. For those who don't know it, and maybe it's the first time visiting Dutch Design Week, it's a bottom-up platform. So it's basically co-shaped, co-created with all the sent-in proposals every year. And there's a whole week of programming, so maybe you've just accidentally come across here. Do know that there's on their website the whole week and next week events. So do check that out. And the challenges they like to solve through design and the future of designs are through technology, social justice, the environment, and so forth. So basically making a better future through design. For those who are here now, we're going to have a lecture by Julia Watson, and after that we have room for Q&A. So I'll collect questions from you, and if you're a bit shy, I also have some questions to ask Julia, but I hope to have an interactive conversation with you later. And after this, we will have drinks at the bar, which is next door. And yeah, do visit there, because if we want to shape a better future, it's always important to build community, to build networks. So do find each other. And I'm sure you all have something interesting to contribute and to tell. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest for today. Julia Watson is an Australian-born author, researcher, lecturer, and landscape designer based in New York, and is an expert on local, traditional, and indigenous technologies, and focuses her work on that intersection of anthropology, ecology, and innovation. Her work on design consultancy foregrounds traditional knowledge, sustainability, and nature-based innovation. And in her lectures, she will elaborate on these findings. And for those who don't know it yet, Lo-TEK stands for Local, Traditional, Ecological Knowledge, and basically we'll share examples of how these systems work with the web of life rather than against it, and what can we learn from this for our future and future generations. So please give a very warm welcome to Julia Watson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much to Dutch Design Week for inviting me here. And there we go. Also to this beautiful setting in this extraordinary museum surrounded by water. So we're going to be speaking today about infrastructures of an ancestral future. So I usually begin my presentations with a land acknowledgement, but today I'd like to begin with this passage that was spoken by the Gunadule people of Panama and Colombia. And they live on a series of islands on this coastal strip of land that are actually poised to become some of the America's first climate change refugees. So this is actually one of their islands, and these are their words. In the cosmovision of some indigenous peoples, the sea is the mother's amniotic fluid. So when something affects the sea, it also affects the mother's womb. And despite all the damage that has been done to it, the sea still continues to produce food with much love. So we can say that energy is love, because everything we have on earth, placenta, oil, coal, is pure love, because they are the bodies of a Mother Earth. So we indigenous people have taken advantage of this, but in a harmonious way. So today I'm going to be presenting work from my forthcoming book, Lo-TEK Water, but also from my first book, which was published back in 2019 now, at the very start of the pandemic, at a time when my publisher said to me, this is the worst time ever that you could be publishing a book for a first-time author. So with these exceptionally low expectations, I sat there in the pandemic watching this labor of love become a perennial bestseller for a publishing house that had to coin a new genre for it. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce you to the concept of Lo-TEK. And as it was explained, it is derived from the words local and traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK. And it is a word that I made up. So if you don't know it, that's why, because I made it up. But it's also called Lo-TEK design by radical indigenism. That's not something I made up. Radical indigenism is a philosophy of a Cherokee professor, Eva Marie Garut, and she says that indigenous mythology and knowledge systems can be used today to really take us on a pathway to understand how to navigate the future. She said that for indigenous people. So in this context, we talk about it in design. Lo-TEK is also a bit of a provocation. It's a bit of tongue-in-cheek because we have these exceptionally extreme biases towards local peoples and their traditions, and we often call them primitive technologies, but they're nothing like that. But until Lo-TEK, all these technologies has really been called Lo-TEK, L-O-W-T-E-C-H, and that's actually defined as unsophisticated and primitive, when these are actually incredibly sophisticated primitive technologies, and they embody all of today's sustainability principles like low energy and low impact and low cost. But Lo-TEK actually even go beyond sustainable, and rather than forming closed loops, they actually form exponential continuous flows. So in Lo-TEK, I question the dominant mythology of technology that now threatens our planet. And I just wondered whether some of the most sustainable technologies had already been rooted in traditions of people who've been shaping their environments in response to climate extremes for millennia. And so the book presented an alternative to either conquering nature in the name of progress or saving nature in the name of conservation by showcasing communities that not only survive but they thrive by designing nature-based systems. And with some of the most imminent threats to communities arising from water, Lo-TEK's sequel documents ancestral aquatic technologies. The book is blurred because it's supposed to be a surprise. Bookended, that's not actually what it looks like. So this book is bookended by case studies that are similar to the first book and built projects in the back. And it's a second exploration that identifies where design has been infused with traditional ecological knowledge, not only in the case studies, but also in those built projects that are material technologies, their landscape architecture, their architecture, but they're also incredible restoration projects. And so it makes that connection between past, present, and future TEK-led design. But I think the real reason that I wanted to write a book about water is because one of my most vivid memories of my childhood was actually sitting glued to the television watching the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Can I just have a show of hands of anyone who remembers watching that on the television? Yeah, I mean, I think it imprinted a lot of people. So I was pretty young. I was 8 years old, and it happened early on a spring morning in 1989, and a supertanker was sailing through Alaska's Prince William Sound, and it ran aground, and it spilled 10 million gallons of crude oil. And so for days, as a really young child, I sat there and I watched. This is what I remember. I remember watching birds being washed in household detergent, and I don't know why it's such a vivid and kind of like a traumatic memory for me, but it really was something that I've constantly remembered. I think it was the first time I ever really understood like the impact of the society we have now and our disintegration of the very sort of seeds of life. But Alaskan locals like Chief Walter Maganak of Port Graham's Ononga fishing village, he spoke of the water itself dying. And he said, oil in the water, lots of oil, killing lots of water. Never in the millennium of our tradition have we thought it was even possible for water to die. But it's true. And so this lecture actually tells you a story in 5 parts. Those 5 parts follow the 5 Lo-TEK specifications that speak to the globally observed patterns of local nature-based innovations. And these are living, co-evolutionary, co-energetic, symbiotic, and cyclical. And so we inhabit a living planet that is in the throes of responding to the rapid warming of her waters and her atmosphere. And we need to figure out how to logically design cities and infrastructures that are also living and responsive to what's happening around us. However, our specifications and codes, they present real challenges to regenerative ancestral design. Codes direct us to design with dead, static, toxic, disposable materials, rather than designing and incentivizing us to design with living, dynamic, healthy, and regenerative materials. So to begin to bridge the gap between the living and the dead and the static and dynamic and the disposable and the renewable, the examples from my forthcoming book are all categorized within the frameworks of climate change development, literature, and policy frameworks, which I think is really important. And those policy frameworks are around the FAO, Food, Water, Energy Nexus, the IPCC, Adaptation Pathways, and the World Bank, NBS, Nature-Based Systems, Categories, Functions, and Benefits for any of those policy-driven people in the room. And that's a heads up. So for our entire material life cycles, ancestral infrastructures, for their entire material life cycles, ancestral infrastructures are composed of complex, responsive, emergent patterns of interactions between organisms and their environments, i.e., they are living. So one thing that Western societies and indigenous cultures actually agree upon is that water is where it all began. And so over eons of earthly rotations, the water of our oceans was the medium that bore life. And in these waters, they shared their knowledge of life with other entities, and they forged connections to exchange resources and transfer energy in this emergent symphony of survival. And then over billions of years, these connections, they built complexity, becoming interrelated networks of knowledge. And those interrelated networks of knowledge is what local people came to understand. So rather than classifying knowledge into these isolated silos of expertise, indigenous knowledge systems use something called relational understandings of time and place and the web of players. And that's what sets it apart from Western knowledge. So a friend of mine, Tyson Yugaporta, who's an Indigenous Australian man from the Appalachian clan, he's also a weapon maker, an artist. He's a professor at Deakin University. He says it's big, vast networks of knowledge and people inquiring and exchanging what they've seen over quite a big period of time and distance. And you have these networks of verification and falsification, systems of knowledge, they're peer review processes. And these vast networks meant that ancestral technologies, they survived. And they evolved alongside successive multiples of many generations using limited resources and adapting to environmental conditions. Meaning that people could not exist without the tech, and the tech just couldn't exist without the people. So they are co-evolutionary. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So in the Pacific Northwest of Turtle Island, which is the original name for North America, commonly known and discovered, the Swinomish Indian tribal community are constructing an intertidal infrastructure which is being used to protect against intensifying weather and tidal events. It's a 200-meter wall formed at the base of which forms the base of a seaside terrace, and it's the first modern clam garden in the US. What it's actually doing is reviving a nature-based technology that these community have been building for 4,000 years, and it's increasing the shellfish production, it boosts biodiversity, and it's mitigating climate challenges through technology that has been used forever. Then on the opposite coast, on the Atlantic Ocean, a 6th-generation women's collective is leveraging a 13,000-year-old tradition with seaweed in the sea for ecosystem remediation. And they are forming the first Indigenous-run kelp farm on the East Coast. So together, these two examples showcase that while ancestral infrastructures might be abandoned or most likely outlawed, kinship collectives are reviving aquaculture and mariculture techniques to literally grow their climate solutions from ancestral knowledge to tackle new and really complex climate conditions. So Lo-TEK are co-energetic. Given we actually live on this energy-saturated planet, ancestral infrastructures are really opportunistic, and they're activated by incredibly sustainable and non-exploitive passive processes and dynamic flows. From celestial movements that energize tides and systems like the Ramli agricultural sand islands of the Abbemuseum in Tunisia, which support lush gardens in a salty, sandy environment, to the solar rays that siphon wild salt of the Michike Gore salt pans of the Goans that transform into sponge-like marshes to absorb floodwater during the monsoon, to the metabolics of material decay supporting the buoyancy of Baira agricultural islands that are constructed from invasive water hyacinth by the landless people of Bangladesh, to those 1,000-year-old microbes in the water cleansing machines that surround the raised agricultural beds of the Chinampa of the Nahua Xochimilco in Mexico. Having supported multiple civilizations like the former Aztec Empire, these indigenous infrastructures, they're still found forming the foundations of local climate resilience across the globe. But the problem is that universally, in architecture, landscape, urbanism, and engineering skills around the globe, ancestral infrastructures are deliberately excluded from curricula. And they remain removed from the collective imaginings of the people who are designing the future. And then adding to this problem is the erasure. So these technologies, they get decommissioned by colonial infrastructures, or worse, they're erased by designers with their climate resilient mitigation and adaptation solutions. So to solve that, we need to institutionalize indigenous knowledge systems and nature-based technologies, and this will have a profound effect on in many ways, but especially in shaping the imaginings of the next generation of world dreamers and shapers and leaders. So Lo-TEK are symbiotic. They create conditions for interspecies exchanges, and they rely on those exchanges to function. So even though these technologies in the Lo-TEK volume are not intended for replication without consent, the act of documentation makes Indigenous intellectual property available for use. So for a project titled Symbiosine that was shown at the Barbican in 2022, the failure to protect Indigenous intellectual property conceived something called the Smart Oath of Understanding. But the actual project in the exhibition, what it did, it created a playbook for how designers can collaborate with Indigenous communities to co-create hybrid climate resilient technologies that are infused with traditional ecological knowledge. The project brief that was actually given out to us was to design a Lo-TEK future of the year 2040. So the first thing I did was I went to 3 communities who I'd been working with for quite a while and asked them if they wanted to partner to help co-create hybrid technologies of the future. And they all agreed. It was the Wakasi of Northeast India, the Madan of the wetlands of southern Iraq, and the Subak of the Subak systems of Bali. So we co-created 3 Lo-TEK infrastructures through workshops and design charrettes. But in the end, 4 technologies emerged. So this is one of the technologies. It's called the 2040 Living Canopy, and it was infused with the intelligence of the Wakasi of Northeast India. So the Wakasi are these people. They live in a forest that receives the most rainfall on Earth. And to deal with this incredible monsoonal landscape and the flooding, they grow living root bridges. And they do this by leveraging a natural phenomenon called inosculation, which occurs when 2 individual trees are growing in close proximity, and they essentially grow together to become one organism. So to grow a living bridge, you can see a video here of them constructing the bamboo framing system that they actually thread the tree roots through to create the bridge. They plant these Ficus elastica trees, and the person that plants this tree does that knowing full well that he will never use this bridge, and neither will his son. Maybe his son's son, but definitely his son's son's son will use that bridge. But there's that intention that you're not designing for now, you're designing for multiple generations in the future. So this is a 15,000-year-old tradition, 1,500-year-old tradition of growing living root bridges, and there's about 77 of these structures within this area of Meghalaya. So what we actually created was the living canopy, and it grows symbiotically with the expansion of urban walkways across a sustainable urban transportation network. What it's actually targeting is those Indian cities that are now experiencing temperatures that soar above 40 degrees Celsius for 70% of the year. And it's supposed to create a canopy that reduces the urban heat island effect. It establishes more biodiversity in the city. It supports a really comfortable microclimate for pedestrians. It reduces pollution, and it sequesters carbon. And this will grow throughout your city along with your urban transportation network. So the 4th technology I actually think is the most interesting technology, even though I'm not an attorney. But this is a transcript of it. It's a legal technical innovation. And it's supposed to ensure that the intellectual property of the Indigenous community that's captured through the process of workshopping and sharing knowledge actually stays with that community. It's exhibited as a sound shower. So this is the first time it's ever been written and shown, because most Indigenous knowledge is transferred through speaking. It's a 9-part oral contract that strips away your typical memorandum of understanding, your typical Western contract, to its very bare legal essence. And the smart oath of understanding, it's kind of realigning the approach of agreement making to be more aligned towards Indigenous processes and approaches of agreement making. And in the exhibition, I managed to get the CEO of Bureau Happold, which is the international engineering firm that was also working with us on this, to speak the first eight parts. And then the communities, they responded in their own dialect, and they accepted this SOOU. And then I spoke the English translation. So this process now protects all of those communities and their intellectual property so that they remain the owners of that knowledge. The smart part of the SOOU, its name is taken from smart contracting. So that means that this contract, while spoken, is stored on a public blockchain that is transparent, that anyone can see. It is there in perpetuity. And we can use provenance tracing technologies to track this knowledge back to the original owners of that knowledge. So the SOOU's 2nd generation will play on loop as a soundscape at the first Lo-TEK case study house, which has been commissioned for the upcoming real estate exhibition at K21 Dusseldorf in Germany, which is winter 2025-26. So working with architect Catherine Larson, whose project Seaweed Thatch Reimagined is actually in the next book, and Laura Feline Ebbison, who is the first female thatcher who's been educated in seagrass thatching in Denmark in the last 10 years. We're going to create something called THUS, the House of Understanding. Its mission is to preserve the knowledge and craft of seagrass construction from seabed to structure, and provide a roadmap for working with local bio-based resources and integrate traditional materials back into contemporary architecture, and ensure at the same time that IIP is protected through real-world, oath-based, smart contracting technology that works alongside typical architectural contracting agreements. So there's no excuse for architects not to be able to work with Indigenous communities anymore because we have the IP protected. We can compensate the communities based on the value that they bestow on their knowledge systems. Lo-TEK are cyclical. They are triggered by the repetition of the sun rising and setting by days, seasons, and years, in opposition to the irreversible linear construct of time as past, present, and future. So this transition towards a deeper understanding of our planetary systems will be fraught with failures and with frictions, but the process of shaping the infrastructures of an ancestral future, it's already begun. So Lo-TEK Water dedicates the second half of the book to recent material innovations, landscape projects, and architecture projects infused with TEK, all produced within the last 10 years. So this is one example. On the right, you see a fire-retardant, thermally insulating architectural system for emergency housing that's being constructed and co-developed with these communities, the communities of Lake Titicaca on the border of Peru and Bolivia. And so what is happening is where they're using the traditional mat weaving techniques to create bioclimatic, cost-effective, biodegradable, and regeneratively sourced material technologies that are deeply embedded in local traditions and culture, and they offer really pragmatic responses to urgent climate-related problems. They're literally constructing technology from the DNA of place and people. So Lo-TEK is not authored by a single person. It is created by innumerable voices, which have listened to nature and transcribed millions of conversations that took place over thousands of generations. Conversations that form the foundation of earthen architecture that has shaped shelters for thousands of years, like this project by Emerging Objects, which is Ronald Real and Virginia Sanfratello. And they're really pushing the boundaries of earthen form using enormous armatures to 3D print these types of inhabitable shapes and create previously impossible tectonics within earthen architecture. And then some of these TEK-infused projects you really know well, especially if you're a landscape architect, you should know well. Like this is a project by Koch Fakaram, who's an incredible landscape architect who's practicing in Thailand. This is in Bangkok, and this is Thammasat University rooftop. And it draws on thousands of years of terraced agricultural knowledge to transform the slopes of the roof into productive ponds while pioneering innovative stormwater and wastewater management systems. Or Kongjan Yu's Sponge City. Most people don't know that the Sponge City concept is based on traditional ecological knowledge. Kongjan Yu actually was observing traditional local farmers and their technique of cut and fill polder dike technology, which might sound familiar given we are where we are, to reshape intertidal terrains and create closed-loop systems for fish rearing and food cultivation in city landscapes. And it is in these projects that the blueprints of good ancestors have already been drawn. So though people are drowning in this age of information while starving for wisdom, they can still tune into the knowledge systems of local communities that give voice to seemingly silent waters, while replacing the outdated design frameworks that consider the earth and all she offers as extractable and expendable. I really believe that if any technology is needed in this climate crisis, it is the ancestral nature-based technologies that have co-evolved with communities for tens of thousands of years. Custodianship prevailed before the mythology of technology made humans the Earth's greatest threat. But the relations of 7 generations before us, they already taught us and gave us the lessons for life to endure. So as designers, I think we have a profound responsibility to design spaces that respect and regenerate the land. And so to truly achieve this, we must learn from and integrate Indigenous perspectives and knowledge systems into our practices. So this I just wanted to show you because I said last night on the stage that I wanted to leave not just giving a lecture, but offering an idea that is a call to action. This is a call to action that I co-authored with a number of Indigenous academics and activists, and we gave it on Indigenous Peoples Day, which was last Monday, at the American Institute of Landscape Architects annual meeting. We opened the entire meeting and set the tone for the 4-day meeting with a call to action. The call to action invites designers to do the following: to respect Indigenous knowledge, to empower future generations by institutionalizing Indigenous knowledge systems, and to engage with practitioners. So I want to offer this because I think we have a template that we need to share, and to ask institutions that you're associated with to come along on the journey and invite them to also be part of this decolonizing and really historical sort of reconciliatory action, to think about how we can build a base of Indigenous knowledge systems and support for these kind of ideas and practices back into the way that we design. Thank you. I'm going to leave this on the screen for people to read as well, also because the next slide said drinks at the bar, so we don't want to go there yet, but we're going to stay here.
Thank you so much for providing so many examples. One question I would ask is like, can you provide more examples? But I know there's many in the book.
Yes, there's a book.
There's the book, yes, exactly.
There's two.
But maybe before we go open up the floor to the audience, I would like to ask maybe a first reaction from Mirjam van der Lubbe, creative head of the Dutch Design Week. You've been listening. Yeah, what did it do to you?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Julia, for being here and sharing everything with us. I mean, we've seen you on stage yesterday as well. It's totally inspiring, but it's also so necessary, your story that you're sharing with us. To ask a question immediately is like, oof, it's a difficult one. But I have two questions. One is, if you very much relate, of course, to the power of the Indigenous knowledge and the materials that we have around us, and the knowledge that has been there for so long. At the same time, if I see the world developing with all its technologies and innovations that are there, how do you relate those two next to each other? And where do you see opportunities also for them to be combined to the future? And the other one is actually, then I'll give you back
Just
the
ask
microphone.
one at a time.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about our young design community, you know. I think they will be very inspired by our words, and I think they also want to take action in this. And how can they actually do that within the possibilities that they have at this moment in time?
I mean, I think it's an incredible provocation for designers to think, you know, where are we now with our construction systems? Where are we with our material technologies? Where are we with our value systems? Where are we within our code of ethics as practitioners? I think a lot of us, especially in the landscape architecture community, we have this code of ethics that advocates for nature. But we don't really advocate for that connection of managing and working with nature, and from learning from the communities that have built knowledge and retained knowledge over thousands of years of how to do that. So we don't make space for that. We don't make it space for it within our codes, within our governance systems, within policy. So I think there really has to be a way for designers to say, okay, if we are to move forward, if we are to be regenerative, if we are to sort of go beyond this ethos of sustainable Band-Aid, but still continue with sort of business as usual, but figure out sort of how do we slightly Band-Aid the problem. We really need to systemically change a lot of things and the way we practice. And for me, as an educator for 12 years, now having released a curriculum that is really including dismissed voices and histories back into the design conversation, I think that if we really want to build climate literacy for youth. We need to do it within our education system so that the next generation actually has no contestation in their mind, and we don't have to build an ethos of advocating for ancestral technologies or practices or bio-based building, and we don't have to break down codes because it's just within them that they say we know innately that we need to reconnect humans with nature and restore our relationship with nature. I think, what can you do now? I mean, there's 3 things on the board right here that you can do now. I think it's sort of, as I said, exploring how knowledge systems can be integrated within the knowledge and the way that we educate our youth. I think I come from a country that was colonized 250 years ago, and I live in a country that was colonized 400 years ago. So in each place, there's a very different landscape on how this conversation actually occurs. But also in cities like Eindhoven, there is a diaspora of people that come from all over the world, and building space within our design profession so that people from everywhere can bring their knowledge systems and work with those knowledge systems, I think is really important as well.
Thank you so much. And maybe one follow-up question, and this is also to warm you up, so you know you're next. So I'm also going to look to the left for you, but I guess a lot of the technologies, at least in our colonial way of thinking, restore our relationship to nature, but then already placing us outside of nature, we're sort of confined to the English or Western languages. To what extent, because I can imagine, but maybe that's my stereotype of architects and landscape designers, is a lot will be looking at the material redesigning. We just need to redesign it. But there's also a relationship, a value system that really looks at things another way. So could you speak to that? How, or have you seen practices to bridge that gap? Because maybe we just look at the material side of it, but not so much the value, maybe even spiritual side of it.
So the next book was actually, the foreword was written by an incredible Diné activist and academic, and her name is Dr. Lila June Johnston. She is someone to look up. She's a sort of a really guiding light. She looks at very similar systems to the systems that I'm exploring, but she's usually looking at really large-scale systems of the Americas that are no longer functioning because the communities somehow collapsed. But I think that's a really big lesson for us when you just sit back and think about it. She talks about the software, and that the intention of a lot of these systems was that they would be based upon the value systems of reciprocity, that you weren't always taking and extracting, that you're exchanging, that you were giving space to nature and other entities and providing for them, because we were custodians. We weren't just building a park for people, we were building a park for birds and other species and also non-avian and insect. We were building spaces for plants and plant colonies. And she talks about that Indigenous communities think of other species as having their own nationhood. And when a civilization can say, I respect the nationhood of a bird species as much as I respect the nationhood of a human species, that's kind of like when we know that we are evolved. But what she's really talking about is saying that there's a value system of understanding and that you have to have a certain level of respect and reciprocity and engagement for saying, we're not just here for us. We were always here as custodians, and to take that on, and I think it's something that's especially relevant in our community because we can enable and enact that as designers, and we can do it through material technologies, and we can do it through the way we would design landscapes and involving communities. But I think that within that, we explore those value systems. She calls it the software of understanding of these types of systems. But one thing is also not to speak for other communities, so I would say please go and look her up. She's an incredible academic, an incredible activist, and she has all of the wisdom when we're speaking about these things called the software that has to come with it.
Thank you, and I think also very concrete already, imagining our community to be bigger than our human society itself when we design. So I'm gonna look towards you. I mean, I can go on with my questions. Don't be shy. I'll repeat it. Yeah, I can throw the microphone. That would be both dangerous and not good for the microphone. All right, and I'll ask one more follow-up question and then look back to the left again. No, all right. So one question.
I think we have
Oh,
a
there was
question.
one?
I see
Great.
someone there.
Yes. I mean, because you're downstairs, I can. Yes, makes it more easy.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No need to apologize.
Okay. Thank you, first of all. Super inspiring. Well, my name is Glenda, and I identify myself as well as an Indigenous, Alifuru, from the island Maluku, Bailohi, Amalato, my village that I represent. And born and bred in Eindhoven, so I represent Eindhoven as well. But I have a question that is not a design question, but I think it's important, and I'm very curious. Yeah, so I was wondering, when you collaborate with different peoples that you just showed us examples, like the Subek in Bali or Mangalaya, I don't know if I say the right way, or the Amazigh in Tunisia. How does this process looks like? Because you just said earlier that different places, different communities, you have different communication styles, etc., etc. So I'm super, curious. How does this process of building trust looks like, aftercare and that kind of stuff?
It happens over extended time frames. It takes a while. I think my publisher is always like, you write the most complex books that involve the most number of people. So for the first book, I visited a lot of those communities and had worked with a lot of those communities as well. I'd worked with the Subak, I'd worked with the Madan. And so there was relationships that had been built over a really long time. But also sometimes that obviously hasn't happened. So I work with practitioners a lot of the time, students who are doing their PhDs in specific locations. Actually, TU Delft is an amazing place with a lot of different students that are working from around the world. And they have a really strong they have this thing called circular water stories, and they work a lot with Indigenous communities as well, looking at ancestral infrastructures and technologies. And so I've worked with a lot of students and PhD and academics that have already built those connections and those trustful relationships. And everybody is paid who works. They have a choice by which they want to be titled. So in the new book, we have co-authors for every chapter that is working with the community, and sometimes we're not working in spaces where there's Indigenous community, but we have a local community. But yeah, acknowledging, asking, working with, and compensating are really some of like the really important foundations. I've worked on chapters from my home country where over time I have talked with people, and then at the final stage, I haven't been able to access the right person, and we've been told, like, by law, but not by LAW, by something called LORE, which is customary law. We kind of don't agree at this point that you can publish, and that's fine. And so we have to pull that back, and we can't, even though the information is in the public domain, we don't have the we haven't got the right reciprocal relationship. We haven't built enough trust. And that's something as well with the SOOU, what's built into that particular legal innovation, that the community can say, I changed my mind. I don't want to be involved anymore. And so authorship and responsibility always stays with community. I think what you're asking is like, what is kind of the ways that you can do this? What is sort of a bit of like best practice of working with community? And those are some of the learnings that I can offer.
Thank you so much. And maybe also one follow-up question on this. I imagine a lot of these communities are also facing, so one is knowledge theft, let's say, and people extracting, not giving back. So you're establishing, reciprocity by payment and giving ownership back. And how you look at it, because a lot of these communities face multiple challenges of sovereignty. You said, yeah, the animals need sovereignty, let's say, or at least in that other value system. But oftentimes they don't have their sovereignty recognized by a nation state and so forth. So, yeah, how do you navigate that there's maybe more than only the knowledge exchange, but there's also specific challenges that communities face? How can we be an ally in that as architects as well?
I mean, that's a really amazing question, actually, because I have a couple of instances of communities with this next book that we've been working with. And we know at certain stages through the process of the last 4 years with the co-authors that the co-authors have written to us and said, I have to go silent. We're having an internet blackout. There's a civil war. This is happening. The community's under threat. And they just disappear. And so for months and months, we don't have any communication. There's no response to any emails. And this happens far more often than I had ever imagined. And it's usually the greatest threat to these communities around the world is the occupying governments, policies, and leadership, which it's been an eye-opening experience for me through this process. And sometimes the co-authors, we have pictures and bios of the co-authors. The co-authors will not be photographed because they don't want to be able to be publicly identified when the book comes out, but they want their stories out and they want the knowledge from these communities out because they see that this knowledge is disappearing or it's being erased. One community, for example, they live on islands. It's this beautiful lake. I won't tell you where it is, but it's in the next book, but the government is intentionally coming in, the Department of Conservation, and setting fire to the islands where the houses are. So they had a terrible fire, I think it was 3 years ago, where they had, of the 1,300 island houses, they lost almost 800 of those houses because the government set fire to them. So it's really incredibly real problems. I think we sometimes think, oh, how do we pull these from the past? Or how do we use these today? But they're very, very complex problems in place, in issues. So part of this work, I do sort of talk and say I'm an activist. I more think I'm a design activist. But for these people, I work with activists that are trying to get this knowledge out because it's incredibly important and a way to retain their sovereignty as citizens of their nations and to identify that we live here, this is our space. Even though we're landless, we live on water, but we have rights as well. So it's a really important question. And it's often for me, my assistants who work on the projects with me, they get really concerned and upset because we hear of so many things going on that you just won't hear about it because there's a blackout. It's intentionally being kept out of any media, but it's still happening. So I think that there's that side of the story that the book tried to reveal as well.
Thank you for sharing and elaborating on that. I'm also time aware, and I also said part of the program is being able to network and maybe build that community that can create that needed solidarity. So I'm looking at the organizers. Do we have room for 1 or 2 more questions? Yeah? All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do one question round, and sometimes you feel like this tingling, like if I don't ask this question, I'll go home.
Sad.
Yeah, sad. Sad is the word. I didn't want to make it too heavy. But if you feel that, do raise your hand, please. So there's 1 here and there's 2nd there. Is there a 3rd? There's 3. Okay, 4.
Rapid fire.
So it's going to be 1 quick round of these 4 questions, and then keep it brief so we can all do them, basically. Those who are on the ground floor, I'll pass by. And you can shortly say who you are as well.
Hi, Julia. Great presentation, inspiring as well. My question is a simple one. You are communicating to an amazing community. Are you able to bring this message lower to the next generation that are at the high school level, at the grade school level, so that they are actually embedding this at a much younger age so that they could carry this with them going forward?
Thank you. And you've set an example how to keep it short and to the point. Thank you so much.
But I really want to respond, but I'm not going to respond.
Yeah, my question is about the legal document. In my understanding, a lot of the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, is learned from nature from non-humans. How do you acknowledge that in the document and also in relation to the compensation?
Thank you.
Just let me clarify.
yeah.
What do you mean in relation to the composition?
Compensation.
Compensation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rosanna. I'm part of artist collective De Onkruidenier. We have a project also about the sea, Sweet Sweat, so I'm very curious about your new book. But especially sea level rise, climate change, and communities, indigenous communities challenging super harsh conditions. I'm curious about their ways of working, techniques that you work with, and how they might disappear, because can they even sustain themselves with this high water situations that are so challenging? So is it, can they sustain?
Thank you. And then we go to the final question.
Okay.
Links achter, left back. Yes.
This is like a real test of me.
I
have no
I will help you
notepad,
remember. I will
guys.
help you remember.
I'm going to say, remind me.
My name is Jan Jongert of Superuse. Really great you're also looking into the contract that you're setting up. I'm really curious that you already test that contract, and is it somewhere available for using it?
I was going to say, can you code? Question number one for Andre. Yes, we have something called the Living Earth curriculum that I co-designed with a 20-year veteran high school teacher. It's available through the Lo-TEK Institute, which I also started with her earlier this year. It's a digital database, online curriculum. It can be taught over a week workshop or 4 years of high school. It's for what we would call in the US grade 10 to 12. But also you could teach it in grade 9. But also now like University of Arizona, University of Buffalo want to teach this. And also, interestingly, we have corporations that are now really interested, global corporations that want to introduce it as part of their ESG ongoing professional development. So it's really, the idea is to build climate literacy and through including dismissed voices and histories around nature-based technologies. And it's very inclusive of indigenous histories, and to basically bring ancestral knowledge from around the world back into our education system so that every single student graduating from high school has base level climate literacy that is inclusive of ancestral knowledge and histories.
And is this already available in multiple languages, or should we find translators here? Or
You can. Yes, we would love translators, but yes, it's a website, so you can actually click on it, and it'll give you in multiple languages, in the language of the country that you're in. That was number one. Number two, that was a multiple question. The legal contract compensation. So the first part. We have done generation 1 at the Barbican, which was a sound shower. Generation 2 is going to be at Düsseldorf K21 next winter. And what we're going to do there is to test using bringing seagrass thatchers, transmitting technology and their knowledge to architects and other seagrass thatchers, and we'll capture that process and we'll actually code it. So it's not coded yet, but it will be coded into public blockchain. What will happen is at the beginning of that process, the first thing is we'll actually establish terms and conditions of what that next that contract will be, which is part of the process of legal contracting, but usually those terms are defined prior to the legal contract. But we want the communities to define their own terms, and one of those things is define value. Like, what does it mean to you to pass this knowledge on? For a lot of indigenous communities in America, it means land back. It means stewardship of land. So for them, they might ask for, if we give you knowledge, we want, for the Dine community, they want for 1 square mile of converted land, using my knowledge, I want 1 square mile of land back under indigenous stewardship. Or communities might want compensation, or it's up to the actual community to determine the value, because we can't predetermine a value of knowledge. It has to be done by the community. So that's the compensatory part. I'm working with a team of Indigenous academics and intellectual property lawyers. There are two different teams. The academics are called Enrich Hub, and they specialize in Indigenous intellectual property. And the legal entity that I work with is commemorated, and they specialize in blockchain, art, crypto, and intellectual property. So we kind of like have all our bases aligned. I am not an attorney. I can speak some of the language, but not all of it. That kind of, I think, answers your question just a little bit. It's not available yet. This template is available, but we don't have the back end. We've had zero funding for this, so it's really been like a grassroots, in-house, everybody contributing time, pro bono action. We've spoken to the UN division that deals with intellectual property. They're producing their system that is patenting. So they're actually making Indigenous communities move into patenting, contracting that is completely Western system. So we don't want to do that. We're trying to bring this together and make a blend. That's why it's an oral contract, because ancestral knowledge has always been passed down orally. And smart contracting actually supports the opportunity to make an oral-based contract. After next year, we imagine that we'll have the back end done, completed, and we'll be able to then release this but it's meant to be, it's for public use. It's meant to be open for everybody to use. So we have about a year.
And what website platform do they need to follow to get the updates?
www.lo-tek.com, lo-tek.com. And then I think the last question was
on the disappearing of the water and what do you see?
Yeah, I
for
mean,
the
all
future?
these communities are really dealing with the same problems that everybody's dealing with related to water. What they have done is because they've experienced climate extremes over a very long time, we do have communities that are aquatic communities that know just how to live on water, how to let water in and not sort of fortify against water, which is another technique. They're adaptive, they build up, they reclaim land, they build in different types of materials, they position their houses in different ways. There's a lot of knowledge related to like how do you build with water, but yes, they're experiencing the same sort of very rapid decline of climate and their very rapid response to what's happening with rising waters and intensifying storm events and weather events. What they're doing, though, is they're deploying their systems and their technologies to fortify against that. And they're not building walls, they create breakwaters, but breakwaters that are also providing homes and spaces for clams to live, that then they can also, feed themselves with. So yes, they are experiencing all of the same, and they're sort of, we're not romanticizing that because it's an Indigenous technology from Indigenous knowledge that these sort of systems won't be affected. They will, but they're also novelly innovating towards intensifying weather events and towards intensifying tidal events using their own systems. And they'll keep doing that. That's the whole thing, that Indigenous cultures, they're living cultures. They're not from the past. They're not dead. They're living, and so they're innovating and responding over continuous time at the same time as we are innovating and responding. I think the provocation is, can we do this together? Do we really want to do this together? Can we set up the grounds to do this together? Because Indigenous communities, and in the United States, they'll say this, we have been trying to do this with non-Indigenous communities for a very long time. We've been waiting. So now, they say, we realize that we cannot do it together. We need non-Indigenous partners in this, because we're all going through the same thing. So let's figure out how to do that together.
Some islands are disappearing, and in the Netherlands we have different facilities, and we go way faster. That was but we do need to round up, and different place, part of the world, different challenges.
Yeah.
You can
I mean,
respond.
there are communities for example, in Australia, who are confronting that they have to move right now. And so they're working, and the communities are saying, well, we would like to self-determine where we have to go, because they have to move. And so now there's negotiations with Australia that they can come to Australia and occupy land in Australia. But that's just going to be the future. We know that these, like I said, there's going to be frictions and there's going to be failures. We know that. It always happens. But we have to be set and be in a mindset to work together to try and overcome those things. I think there's something really interesting happened, though, with island nations, is though a lot of the island nations on the Pacific are starting to work together and research together and discover that for some of the, say, the Ayapua in Hawaii, which was a watershed kingship system that worked at the scale of watersheds with technology from the coastline all the way to the top of the hill, they're discovering that that type of system is actually prevalent on all islands throughout the Pacific. So they're starting to come together, and those united forces for small islands having a powerful voice that is not an individuated voice, but a collaborative voice is really where they're finding their strength, both against systems like World Bank and trying to fight climate change as well. So we're starting to see, I think, let's end on a note that's optimistic, that climate change offers opportunities for collaborations. It's not all doom and gloom and destruction and chaos. And like I was speaking before, my Indigenous friends say, we're in the fourth world. We've seen this before. Civilizations collapse, but from crisis, new worlds emerge. So maybe we're seeing the emergence of a new world, and we have the opportunity to shape that, because in previous times it wasn't known that altogether this was happening, and it wasn't altogether happening. We have the opportunity to collaborate and really work together to shape the world that we want to be in. We just have to make the decision to all do that together, and we need to get our governments to align with us. That's the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this powerful closing.
Thank you.
So I didn't even have to announce the applause anymore, but for some final practical wrap-up, so are you still around for follow-up questions at the bottle, they call it in Dutch, which is like drinks after the talk?
Yes.
All right.
I'm looking to my chaperone.
So if that doesn't spark interest in staying and hanging around, be welcome. We want to thank again Van Abbemuseum for making this possible, for collaborating with the Dutch Design Week. Do check out the agenda. And in terms of collaboration, I really love the note that you made. And for those who don't know, there's spoken more than 6,500 indigenous languages across the world. So a lot of collaboration to do. So thank you all for coming. My name is Max, and hope to see you at the bar.
Thank you very much.